Oh!
Quanzu Dude Pizza. What do you want?
Bro, it's me. It's time.
Let's do it.
And with that, we are back once again to talk about The Crow, because just 1 month after the film's release, it got thrust onto video on demand because of poor performance. But I don't want to go into too much detail, as I have already filmed a review for that video, which you can check out right up here. So instead, I have brought my good friend Nerd Scum along for the ride of this conversation, because he had a very interesting idea. Instead of just talking about the movie we got and hammering it home again, what would it be like if we got the opportunity to make a Crow movie? What would be the way that we would approach it? So we decided, well, let's go into it with the comic books. Look to the comic books for source and inspiration. So we have picked out 2 books today to talk about of why we would think they would make really good Crow movies. But before we get into that, I want to go ahead, pass it to Nerd Scum to give sort of like maybe a few thoughts.
Yeah, I have a video about my predictions for the Crow movie, which almost all turned out to be 100% right. So you can go watch that. And even though I'm talking about it before it, that's what we got. So, give that a check out if you want. But yeah, I'm Nerd Scum, and I'm sure Joe will have all the links for my stuff down there. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into how you could properly reboot the Crow franchise.
And the 2 books that we picked today would be The Crow, Flesh and Blood, and The Crow, Skinning the Wolves. So The Crow, Flesh and Blood is a book written by James Vance with cover art by series creator James O'Barr and interior art by the legendary Alex Maleev. The Crow, Flesh and Blood tells the story of Iris Shaw, an officer for the Bureau of Land Management, as she investigates local farmers who are illegally poisoning coyotes. Her investigation eventually leads to her death, along with her unborn child, town marshal, and an old woman. The injustice allows her to be returned by the Crow, of which she embarks on her quest for revenge, leading to a final confrontation against the man who organized her death. And I think this story has all of the elements that a modern Hollywood studio is looking for. For one, we have a female lead, and in context to Crow movies is not only a fresh take, but adds a different perspective to the concept of loss. Because in film, children are often the symbols of innocence and purity, and having that innocence just tragically lost is a type of grief that I think would hit really hard on screen and audiences could just connect with. The kills in this story are also quite brutal. Iris as a character doesn't just kill and feels better, but she in a way kind of enjoys the act of it. She almost turns it into a game by dispatching her enemies in a similar manner to how the victims died, from burying the killers underground to hanging them upside down and bleeding them dry, burning them alive. This in a way adds a new layer of vindication to the death of the villains of the story. Iris is also a returned character via the Crow who doesn't heal. She even a few times refers to herself as a zombie, and although she can't feel pain, she does have to monitor how much damage she's taking, because she has to do things like stitching herself shut or stapling wounds closed. This can add a sense of gravity to the theatrical experience, as our main character isn't just gonna go barreling through the bad guys. She has to plan things out, be a little more methodical. And then you just structure it in such a way where when the film starts off, she's maybe being a little more stealthy, but as she comes closer to her overall objective, she becomes maybe just a little more reckless, taking on more damage. And there is some great juxtaposition of familial bonds between the antagonist and the protagonist, such as, should Iris kill the children of the villain as a way to even the scales to make him hurt as much as he's hurt her? Or does she allow those kids to live and just take him out? Because he is truly a horrible person, and some of his kids are old enough to have been influenced by him. All of these can raise questions and explore to what extent does vengeance need to be dispatched? At what point do we cross from being the hero to the villain? I also think this character has a pretty like sleek and interesting look, kind of similar to Kate Beckinsale from Underworld. And since we've already seen that, it's a look that will definitely translate well to the screen. I also kind of like the alternate face paint idea because when it comes to the way the Crow looks, everyone's used to, you know, the white face paint with the lines on the eyes and like the pseudo lined smile. And while it is a classic look, I do think that depending on the character, you can have different looks. Lastly, there's the Crow itself. Now, when talking about the movies specifically, we've never really seen the main character converse with their so-called Crow guide. And even if you don't approach it from an area of actually like hearing the Crow talk, I think there's something you can do visually and artistically with that concept. Because when you do delve into the comics themselves, the Crows have always kind of varied. But one underlying focus that is there is that they are very aware. They're not just some random birds that are doing what they're doing out of instinct. You can tell there's actual thought behind them. And very much like here in this particular story, as the Crow is making suggestions about, hey, just go out and dispatch the guys. I gave you the power to do so. Iris is sort of like, nah, I'm okay. This isn't going to be quick and dirty. I'm going to make it last. To which the Crow's general reaction is, oh, okay, all right, we're going down that road. So the Crow, Flesh and Blood, coming soon to no theater near you.
So I think Joey brings up some very interesting points, especially again, like you can look back on my channel several years and see that for a long time I was saying, if you want to reboot the Crow franchise, like do a female-led movie, because since probably about 2015, like one of the best ways to get producers interested in your movie, if you're doing an action movie, is a female-led action movie. Everybody wants to capitalize on that like Resident Evil action lady, boss bitch, you know, kind of extravaganza thing. And for this, if you were to get someone like Mia Goth or Anya Taylor-Joy to do the main role, like you could definitely get butts in the seats. Both of them have fan bases outside of the Crow fan base that they could bring to it. So I definitely think that is like, just from a starting point, is a great way to kind of like lead people into the idea. Another thing that's interesting about this, as Joey was saying, like with the background of the character, it is very different from any other version of the character we've seen in the Crow films. Again, she started off as someone who had a role of moral power in life. So whenever her idea of mortal justice is then challenged with this new perception of the world, that's going to cause interesting character beats that we have not seen in previous iterations of the avatars of the Crow. And furthermore, like, yeah, the idea of her having an unborn child that dies with her is not only like a literal idea that hasn't been explored in any of the Crow movies, but we have had a character who was a parent. But even in that movie, Crow City of Angels, the father-son storyline kind of takes a back seat to the love story of Ash and Sarah, which was supposed to be setting up for further sequels with the character of Ash, which, like, again, just didn't work out for them very well. So they ended up kind of changing the ending to not go that direction. Also, like, with the idea of Iris specifically in this story and the way that they deal with her healing or lack of healing is, again, very interesting because it's different from both the movies and slightly different from what we see in the original book. You know, in the original book, Eric is so much depicted as kind of a ghost or a ghoul that, like, he will receive massive amounts of damage, but we never actually see him heal. It's more just a matter of later on, we'll see him again when he's going off on a new, like, submission, and he'll kind of be in pristine form again, unless it is a wound he's inflicted on himself that says something about his emotional state, or if it's one of the wounds that he received during his actual death, like the scar across his face. So having a character who, yes, they're technically immortal and can't be killed, but they can hurt themselves to a point of no longer being able to carry out their mission, it adds an extra, like, weird body horror element to the existential horror that already is the idea of resurrection as the avatar of the Crow. And the last thing that I wanted to say about it was that, again, kind of talking about the idea of how far vengeance goes. Is a really interesting idea because, again, so much of what we understand of morality is based on our perceptions as human beings who only have, like, the idea of us living and dying and that being the end of it to go off of in terms of rationaling our morality. But whenever you realize that there's something beyond that, and you know it for a fact, and then you're put in a position where already like the job of the crow, not like the avatar of the crow, but the crow as an entity that brings people back is to balance the scales. So, yeah, if you have someone who's truly evil, who has a child who you can see going down that path, is it a balancing of the scales to take what they took from you and also prevent that child from committing further harm? Or is it like one of these scenarios of like, if you had a time machine, would you go back and kill Hitler kind of thing? You know, like where does the road of morality lead and how many rights does it take to get to a wrong is a really interesting concept that because of the ambiguous moral nature of the crow and how far removed it is from our understanding of morality as humans, you could really explore that and play around with it a lot more.
Yeah, man. And I just think you bring up some really good points on that front because as we've discussed and talked about The Crow over any kind of length of time, it sort of comes back to what have we not seen before in the movies? Because the movies themselves have kind of fell into sort of like a formulaic pattern where it's always trying to go back and recapture the original Crow, whereas the comics have allowed itself to sort of test new ideas and different grounds, which means that they're more or less ripe with interesting concepts to take inspiration from for, you know, potentially new films. I mean, just even the new movie itself sort of has that idea about the pain of, you know, taking the injury and stuff like that. But, you know, as I stated in the video, it's just not around long enough for it to really matter in context to the rest of the film. Whereas where I'm taking this book, for example, and why I decided to pitch this one out is because it sort of does play, you know, a point to the overall narrative of the story where it does force the character to be a little more stealthy at times. She has to kind of think things through. And I do like the fact that the book also doesn't take, you know, this female character and just has her go like barreling through a bunch of like 200-pound guys and stuff like that. There is like thought and a methodical nature to how she approaches the situation and stuff like that. And again, it's just like I truly think that as if we have a film that focuses on that and just kind of watching that character progress over the course of a movie and just taking more damage and then finding new ways of having, okay, she's got to staple herself shut, she's got to sew herself shut because she's not going to heal, obviously, you know. And to think, you know, you could even take those ideas to the extreme on screen, you know, have a scene where all her guts pour out up the front and she's got to like, you know, load them back in. Could be very interesting. And then that bit where you just talked about, you know, balancing the scales and all of that stuff, you know, it really does go back to kind of that old saying, you know, the highway to hell is paved with good intentions. Effectively, it's, you know, how long can you go down this dark and brooding path before it completely consumes you? And I do think in that, you know, this book in general has the capacity to translate really well to film. And those are just my overall general thoughts. So,
yeah, and again, they're very well thought out. And again, the Crow Flesh and Blood would make an excellent like kind of new starting point for the franchise. And in that same vein of all the things that kind of make that great, again, one of the main things you pointed out was the idea that we want something different. And you know what's completely different than anything we've ever seen the Crow do on screen before? Killing Nazis! The Crow, Skinning the Wolves, originally published in 2013 by IDW, written by series creator James O'Barr, with Jim Terry taking over art duties. Set in a 1945 World War II concentration camp, this installment depicts the newest avatar of the Crow as a victim of said concentration camp, who once resurrected seeks revenge for his death, that of his family, and all those others who have suffered within those fences. I've been saying for years that this would be a great adaptation for a film. Not only is it one of the most unique stories within the Crow franchise, it also is written by the series creator, giving it an air of legitimacy that some of the other stories within the comic or novel franchise just might not have. The story's also 3 issues, perfectly giving you the structure for a 3-act feature film. And in terms of story, the Crow versus Nazis, like, who isn't going to love that outside of neo-Nazis or other racists? And, you know, screw them. As an audience, we love watching Indiana Jones or Captain America or any other number of movie heroes dispatching Nazis. So if you put the unkillable, rage revenge beast that is the Crow up against the killing machine of the Third Reich, you're going to have cinematic gold that people are going to cheer for and enjoy. It's just a no-brainer. I don't understand how this is not one of the things that they've already tried to make. And as we've seen throughout multiple of these attempts at reboots and remakes and refreshes, they've been trying to turn The Crow into a more straightforward action film, and while that's not right at all for Eric's story, it is perfect for this one. This entire story takes place over the course of maybe 2 or 3 hours, so you could actually do like a almost real-time action extravaganza out of The Crow that's only broken up by the very few flashbacks that we get in this book. Again, because this story takes place over such a condensed duration of time, we really don't get as much development in terms of the main character or the main villain, because there's really only one main villain, the commandant of this frickin' concentration camp. Most times I would say that that's a negative. Here, it is a positive. Number one, it helps differentiate it from Eric or any other version of the Crow that we get. But even more importantly, because we don't have those specifics, all we see is the actual death of this man and his family, set within the concentration camp, putting him at odds with the main villain. Beyond that, we don't know who he was, and the villain doesn't know who he was. There's a great scene in the book where the villain asks, "How did you beat me? What were you before I crossed your path? Tell me that, and you can have your little revenge." And in response, the Crow says, "I was a musician. I was a street vendor, a policeman, a thief. I was a mother, a beggar, orphan, artist, a clerk, a teacher, a student, a truck driver, dentist, tailor, a person. I was nobody, a snowflake, a blizzard." And that is so perfect because in doing that, set within this story, you're able to use this one character as a cipher for all the rage and suffering that came out of the Holocaust. And again, you don't need to develop these villains because we are used to, in cinematic language, having Nazis who aren't real people. They're more characteristics and archetypes that are there just to be killed off. So this works perfectly for that. Essentially, you can use these characters to be your allegory for all of the horrors of the Holocaust and that like sense of anger that we all have about it. You know, except for the neo-Nazis, anti-Semites, and other racists out there. There's also a bare enough story that you can make a lot of changes and it doesn't affect the overall narrative or overall themes of the movie. You can do this story and not be as bound to it and the details of the story as you are with something like Eric and Shelley's story. And then when you're talking about the production side of this is a very isolated story, all taking place inside that one concentration camp. So in terms of budget, you could do this thing for insanely cheap, which then would guarantee that you could hit all your profit margins that you want, giving the entire franchise a second lease on life. And furthermore, almost every Crow movie that we have seen outside of the original tries to set it up for that version, that avatar of the Crow, to come back for sequels. And that's just not what the story is built for, because these are all such personal stories. He's not a freaking superhero. Once he kills the people who killed him, it's over. But again, because this character is so much more of a cipher and a metaphor for the suffering of the entire Jewish people during the Holocaust, it means his vengeance is against all Nazis. So you can do more movies with it. Hell, this book ends with sequel bait. It doesn't need that sequel to be a good story, but you could carry it on and do more things with it. It's built into it. It's exactly what people from the production side are looking for out of a Crow movie. It has the kind of action people are accustomed to and that people are okay with, even when it's extremely graphic violence. It has themes and emotions that most audience goers can relate to. It can be made for super cheap, and it can have sequels. And not only does it set up a sequel, it sets up a sequel where you don't have to manipulate any of the pre-existing mythology. You can just run with it. It's all there. It literally has everything that Hollywood keep trying to force into a Crow movie when there's already a story that has all of it. What the fuck, Hollywood?
And yeah, I agree, man. I think this would be this would make an excellent film because, I mean, on one hand, you know, one of the thing about Crow movies specifically too is that a lot of times they take place sort of, you know, in their present day. So it would be very interesting to go back to, you know, a different time period, because you have to think that the Crow in general is probably something that happened most likely throughout all of human history, like up to a certain point. So realistically, you could tell stories within certain time periods in order to give the viewer a different experience each time, because The Crow in general, I think, works best as an anthology type of series, despite Hollywood wanting to obviously try to, you know, create a Crow movie where they could just continuously use the same actor over and over and over again, you know, which luckily they haven't been able to do yet, because, well, this kind of concept doesn't really allow for something like that. And just overall, it's like The Crow versus Nazis. Who would not want to see that? I think if you can take like just one villain to be put on screen that everybody in the audience would just about universally agree needs to die in some of the most horrific and brutal ways possible, Nazis are your best bet, because they are a great like antagonist really to any kind of film that you put them in. And you can just, I could just like imagine sitting in a theater looking up at the screen as, you know, the character takes out like the first Nazi in like just a really crazy way, like probably like, you know, just thumbs into the guy's eyes and like yanks his head off or something. And I just really like this kind of setting, because, you know, the Holocaust is something that was very real. It was a tragedy. It's something that should never have happened. And so putting a film setting in an area like this, and then just watching our character lay waste to the Nazis and stuff, it's definitely something that could provide a cathartic feeling to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And again, like we're both kind of saying, it's like it's kind of the perfect proving ground to like do something extreme and violent and cathartic without anyone really feeling bad about it. You know, because even like you take a group like Satanists, there are some people who are sympathetic to Satanists who aren't Satanists. Only other Nazis are sympathetic to Nazis, and when they see Nazis getting killed in the movie, even they're kind of like, yeah, I get it.
Yeah, very true, man. Very true. I definitely agree with all those points. And I really think that books like The Crow, Flesh and Blood, your picks, The Crow Skinning the Wolves, would be great starters for any kind of Crow reboot. And also, one thing that I like about these stories too is realistically they can be done pretty cheaply. I mean, that's what's good about really any Crow movie, is a Crow movie in general can be done really cheap. I mean, if you have a director that says, hey, I need at least $200 million to make this Crow movie, that guy does not need to be making a Crow movie.
Or for that matter, maybe any movie at all.
So The Crow, Flesh and Blood, and The Crow Skinning the Wolves are two books that we think would be excellent templates to making and rebooting the Crow franchise with. And with that, we now want to know what you think. Do you have any ideas for what could make a good Crow reboot? Are there any Crow comic books that you think would translate well to the screen? Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section below. And again, Nerd Scum, thank you for joining me.
Right on. Again, thanks, Joey. It's always great to be here. Thank you guys at home for watching. Again, definitely check out Joe's video on The Crow. Check out my video from before the new Crow movie came out and see how right I was. And just have fun with this franchise, guys, because, you know, we've had a lot of low points. We've had a few high points, but we've also had The Crow Stairway to Heavens and The Crow Wicked Prayers. So can't get much worse.